Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we're taking a look at some more cards that are currently trending on the market because of their meta applications. Now with some of these, the cards are being talked about right now, but with others, they're more text that might seem a bit obscure but are actually seeing usage over in the OCG. Of course, the games aren't exactly the same, so just because a tech is good over there doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good over here as well. Nevertheless, it's still important to pay attention to these things because players are going to pay attention to OCG results, and we want to make sure that we are as up to date as possible because they're going to affect the prices. Let's get started. Kicking things off, let's talk about one of the crazier things we've seen on the market recently. It's actually Summon Skull. So this card is one of the older vanilla monsters in the game. It's something that Yugi used back in the anime. Now the card itself is actually pretty good for a vanilla since it's a 1 tribute monster that has 2500 attack points. Now obviously in general, vanilla monsters aren't too useful themselves unless they have a really specific set of characteristics that allows them to be used alongside other cards. And of course, the Primite cards now being in the game actually means that some vanilla monsters can be really important. Now this is where Summon Skull comes in. As a vanilla, it's something that will interact with the Primite cards, but as a level 6 Fiend, this card is something that you can use as an Xyz material alongside either Necroquip or Engraver in order to make DDD Wave High King Caesar. You can also access something like Evilzar Lars if you use this card alongside a Bestial, so that's cool as well if you're playing some sort of big pile deck, but obviously as a vanilla it just kind of sucks to draw the card. Anyway, Summon Skull of course has a ton of different printings, so if you just want a copy to play with, you should be able to find a common or rare pretty easily, but the version that has spiked is the QCR from Quarter Century Bonanza. It was still pretty expensive since it is a classic anime card. This was around $25 to $30, but now all of a sudden this card has shot up to $85 per copy. Definitely an insane one, but I guess it's just players wanting QCRs to match the other cards in their max rarity decks, and it doesn't feel as bad playing with QCR Summon Skull so that you can keep your Metal Raiders first edition copies in your binders. This is one for you guys to make note of and potentially offload, since I'm sure there are some of you that pulled this back in Bonanza and just left it in your trade binders. Up next, let's take a look at Sky Striker Ace Aelia. So despite being a Sky Striker card, this one is one that was actually hyped up as somewhat generic spot removal. It requires a light and or dark monster to make, but you can pop a card on the field and then potentially have to send this card to the graveyard if you don't have enough spells in your graveyard. The card never actually did see any sort of competitive play, I think just because there were other better, more generic things you could play instead, but because Aelia was a short printed secret rare in Battles of Legend Monstrous Revenge, the card has always had a decent amount of demand. Now, we have new Sky Striker support coming in Duelist Advance, finally confirmed, and this card is trending on the market once again. I don't know if this is something that they necessarily have to play, since its effect doesn't really fit in with the rest of like the Sky Striker cards, but of course players want to be as prepared as possible and pick up all of the relevant cards from the archetype. Now this card has sat at between $10 to $15 for most of its lifetime, but within the last month or so, since the Sky Striker support was revealed, we've now seen it shoot up to $25 per copy. To me, this is something that I would be trying to offload, since I'm sure that all of the Sky Striker cards will be reprinted eventually, with how much Konami seems to really love the archetype, so try to get as much value from this card as you can before that reprint eventually drops. Another Link monster here, we next have Lingeribo. So this card is a Link 1 monster and it requires a level 4 or lower Cyberse monster to make. However, the card actually has some really powerful effects. 1, you can tribute it to negate a trap card and banish it, and then 2, you can tribute an At Ignister monster that was summoned from the extra deck to special summon this card out of the graveyard. So this card is extremely important in the Malice Mirror match, as you can shut down your opponent's Malice traps, Infinite Impermanence, and Dominus Impulse. It banishes the trap that it negates, so an impulse that's used as follow-up won't destroy your card. And it's also really easy to make, so a lot of the time Malice players are going to have to activate their traps early on in the mirror match to ensure that their cards are actually able to resolve. But the other thing is that you can bring this card out of the graveyard by tributing the new Code Talker At Ignister after you've already used its effect, and that's another disruption that you have access to. Now with this card, it's basically mandatory in the Malice extra deck at 1, and I've even seen some players choosing to run 2 copies because it is that strong. Fortunately, the card isn't too pricey. The original Ultras are up there a little bit, currently sitting at around $6 to $8 with not too many copies available on the market. However, at the moment, the Supers are dirt cheap at under $1 each. Right now, we're looking at Malice being one of the best decks of the upcoming format, so if you are planning on playing the deck eventually, I would make sure that you at least pick up a couple of super rare copies of this card, just in case. Alright, one more Link monster. This time we have Proxy Magician. So this card's a pretty unassuming one. It's a generic Link 2 monster, and you can activate its effect to conduct a fusion summon using materials from your side of the field. Now at first glance, this card doesn't seem to be anything that crazy, especially since the materials have to be on the field instead of them being allowed to be from your hand. However, the card is being discussed as an extra deck option in Memento. The deck has 2 main ways to fuse, either Memento Fusion or the effect of Sleepy. So if your opponent negates Sleepy, you only get 1 fusion summon, but you generally want to fuse twice so that you can make both Twin Dragon and Creation King. Because of that, players are using Proxy Magician as a last-ditch effort to try to fusion summon, and Memento are actually pretty good at swarming the field with monsters, so fusing from the field is usually just fine. Players are naturally pretty big on Memento right now, as it just won YCS Houston not that long ago and wasn't hit on the following ban list, so players are naturally expecting it to still be a really strong strategy going into this upcoming format. This card was originally a common, so it's really easily accessible, and its super rare and secret rare upgrades just really aren't too pricey. It's just the QCR that has jumped in price, as they were around $18 to $20 before, but have now doubled up in price and sit at right around the $40 mark. Personally, I've never really been a fan of this card, so I'd probably recommend offloading the high rarity printing while it is so high, and just playing with a cheaper printing. I'm sure that you'll be able to buy back the QCRs down the road if you really want them. Okay, so here we're going to take a look at a few cards that I think are worth keeping an eye on moving forward, and the first card is Dark Ruler No More. So in the OCG, there's actually a bit of a trend in the format where players are moving towards board breakers. Yummy is a really powerful deck, and the Dark Ruler is a way to shut off a bunch of their interactions all at once. On top of that, Dark Ruler No More is something that's really hard to play around. Your opponent can't negate it with monster effects, and Crossout Designator is now limited to 1, so your opponent's only real way to deal with it is something like Solemn Judgment. Of course, our format is different because we don't have Max C, our ban lists are different, and they don't have the Mitsurugi cards either. But it seems that players are getting ready for Dark Ruler No More to come back into the format. Dark Ruler was in Rarity Collection 1, so for the most part it's pretty cheap, right? Just like the Collector's Rares, the Ultimate Rares that are a couple of dollars each now. The QCRs, however, are very interesting. These were at around $25 to $30. They'd actually fallen in price down to a low of about $20 each, but they're now trending back up to $30 over the last month or so. If the card continues to see play in the OCG, then I think that the card is going to continue its upward trend on the market here. It's going to depend on the timing, since it does seem that there's some delays with us getting Justice Hunters here in the TCG, but this might be a card for you guys to pick up sooner rather than later. Up next, we have Retaliating Sea. So I'm pretty sure this is something that players have been talking on and off about for the last few years as another floodgate hand trap. When your opponent activates a spell that special summons a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. So the good thing is that you can chain this to the spell. So if they activate Polymerization, for example, the materials that they're fusing with are going to get banished, and that's not generally going to be a good thing for a lot of decks. Over in the OCG, Retaliating Sea has come up as a pretty strong side deck option against Dragontail. Early builds in the OCG would use King of the Swamp and Polymerization to get access to cards like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, but Retaliating Sea stops monsters from going to the graveyard, so it's deterring the Dragontail strategy just that little bit more. Players in the OCG are adapting, of course, and some players are choosing to cut that Polymerization and King of the Swamp package entirely, but who knows exactly how the TCG format is going to develop. With this card, it has a few different common printings that are under $1 each. Also, we have the ultra rare printing of the card that's still pretty cheap as well. The one version that is up higher is the OTS Tournament Pack Super. Those are coming in at around $3 to $4 each as the hardest version of the card to find. if I were you guys, I would definitely pick up a few copies of the Ultras now, just in case the card starts to see more play down the road. And finally, the last card we have for today is Spell Card Monster Reborn. So I think when this card first came out, it was really easy to just disregard it as a retrain of a card that couldn't see play in today's format. Monster Reborn obviously not being very good. However, the card is actually pretty solid. It's a quick play spell card that summons a monster out of your opponent's graveyard, but neither player can activate its effects or attack with it for the rest of the turn. So over in the OCG, apparently this is a card that some players are running as a tech. Stealing a monster out of your opponent's graveyard is basically like banishing it, so it's a disruption where you hopefully get to do something with the body afterwards. However, the cool thing is that in the Malice mirror match, you can steal your opponent's artifact Lancia on your own turn, and then tribute it from the field to stop your opponent from banishing during their turn. So very interesting application there. Of course, this card was just a super rare in the Infinite Forbidden, so it's only around $1 or so right now. However, we do want to keep an eye on a lot of the supers that come from core sets, especially ones that are more generic. We expect this card to be reprinted in the 2025 tins, and if it does, that'll definitely bring down its price. However, if for some reason the card isn't in there, or if it's included but as a common, or if the card starts to see some significant usage well before the reprint drops, then there is a chance that Spell Card Monster Reborn might go up in price just a little bit. This isn't something that I think is worth going out and actively trying to buy up, but I do think it's worth paying attention to and digging up out of your hollow bulk and setting aside just in case. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. Definitely some like smaller sort of things on here, maybe things that aren't really popping out or are clearly format defining cards, but these are still things that are important. Remember that we are sort of in this limbo format right now because we don't have any sort of definitive results, but that is going to change in just a couple of weeks when we have YCS Providence, and that's going to be the first big event with all of the new cards from Alliance Insight, so definitely pay attention to that. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.